There is a single line in the Ethiopian Bible that most of the Christian world has never read. It survives in a language almost no one alive can speak, carried down through the mountains of northern Ethiopia in books that Rome released its grip on more than 1,000 years ago. And the line describes something the rest of Scripture never says out loud. It says, "The angel assigned to you weeps." Not often, not for every failure, once, a single tear across an entire human life. And the same passage does something stranger still. It tells you exactly what causes it. Not sin in general, not death. One specific act, named in the old tongue, set down by a scribe who wanted whoever came later to know precisely what breaks the composure of a being that has watched over a person since before that person could speak. For most of history, that line was unreadable in the West, because the book it lives in was cut from the canon, and the copies were left to decay, and only one church on earth refused to let it go. This is what that church kept. This is what the angel is said to weep over. And this is why the men who removed it did not want it read. To understand the line, you have to understand the book it comes from, and that book belongs to a canon almost no one outside Ethiopia has ever held in their hands. The Ethiopian Orthodox Tewahedo Church carries the widest Bible in all of Christianity. Where a standard Protestant Bible holds 66 books and a Catholic Bible holds 73, the Ethiopian canon holds 81. Inside those extra books is an entire literature that the rest of the world either lost or discarded. And the strangest of them, the one that has drawn the most fear and the most silence, is the Book of Enoch. Enoch was never a minor figure. He is named in the opening pages of Genesis as a man who walked with God and then was taken, who did not die the way other men die. For centuries, a book carrying his name moved across the ancient world. The earliest Christians knew it well. The letter of Jude, which still sits in nearly every Bible printed today, quotes the Book of Enoch directly and by name. Early Christian writers treated it as true and defended it in their own writing. And then, across a few short centuries, the West turned against it. The book faded from the Greek and Latin world so completely that by the Middle Ages most scholars believed it was gone for good, a lost scripture known only by rumor and by that single line Jude had left behind. It was not gone. In the highlands of Ethiopia, copied by hand in the ancient sacred language called Ge'ez, the complete Book of Enoch survived unbroken, while the rest of Christendom forgot that it had ever existed. Ge'ez is not a language you will hear spoken on any street. It stopped being an everyday tongue well over 1,000 years ago and lived on only as the sacred language of the Church, the way Latin lived on in the West. And it was precisely that isolation that saved the book. While the wider world argued and edited and eventually erased, a small number of monasteries in the Ethiopian highlands simply kept copying, letter by letter, generation after generation, guarding a text that everyone else had agreed to forget. The weeping angel survived because a handful of monks in the mountains never received the message that it was supposed to be dangerous. Generation after generation they did the quiet work in front of them, not knowing that the work was the survival of a book the world lost. And what those pages preserved was not gentle. They described angels who watched the earth from above, angels who kept written records of the living, and one moment of grief so exact that the scribe reduced it to a single act. It is not a book written to comfort. It names things plainly. It measures grief the way a mason measures stone, and it assumes the reader is strong enough to be shown exactly where the last line falls, and exactly what is waiting on the other side of it. Before I show you that act, and before I show you what the men who erased this book were trying to keep out of your hands, there is something I have to say first. And before we go further, I need to pause for a second, because what I'm about to tell you gets significantly darker. And I realized a while ago that some of this cannot be fully explained in a video format. The complete reconstruction of the guardian angel passage the Western Church cut from the Book of Enoch, the exact Ge'ez wording of the single act that makes it weep, the four names the Watcher's text gives to the angels who record you, the Council of Laodicea's own canon list naming every book they struck out, I put it all into a written document. It's linked below and the QR code is on your screen. Now let's continue. The Book of Enoch opens with a scene that no one who reads it forgets. 200 angels, called in the text the Watchers, look down from heaven upon the daughters of men and choose to leave their appointed place. They descend onto a mountain, they bind themselves together by an oath, and they begin to teach humanity things that were never meant to be taught. Metalwork and the making of weapons, cosmetics and enchantment, the reading of the stars and the signs of the moon. And from their union with human women come the giants, the Nephilim, whose violence fills the earth with blood until the ground itself begins to cry out. The forbidden lessons matter more than they first appear. The Watchers did not merely sin. They handed humanity power without wisdom, the ability to do without the maturity to restrain. They taught the making of blades and the mixing of poisons and the charms that bend another person's will. They opened the sky and read its secrets aloud to people who were nowhere near ready for them. In the logic of the book, this is the original catastrophe. The moment knowledge outran conscience, and nearly every horror that follows grows out of it. The giants are only the visible result. The deeper wound is that heaven's own guardians chose to arm the earth and then stood and watched it tear itself apart with the tools they had handed over. That is the part many people have heard, if they have heard any of it at all. But the book does not stop with the crime. It turns, in its 9th chapter, to the response of heaven, and this is where the older tradition of the weeping angel truly begins. 4 archangels, named in the text as Michael, Gabriel, Raphael, and Uriel, look down from the sanctuary of heaven and see the blood being spilled across the earth, and the souls of the dead crying upward toward the gates of the sky. And the archangels do not respond with anger first. They respond with grief. They carry the lament of the earth before the throne of God, and they ask a question that echoes through the entire book. They ask how they are meant to keep watching this. This is the root of it. In the world of Enoch, the angels are not distant machinery. They are witnesses. They see everything. They forget nothing, and they are moved by what they see. The book describes a class of beings whose entire assignment is observation, and it treats their sorrow as something real. The angel does not weep because it is weak. It weeps because it is watching, and because it cannot look away, and because it remembers every single thing. The old texts are full of this recording work, and they give it hands. There are angels who watch, and there are angels who write, pressing the deeds of the living into heavenly books, the way the scribes of the temple pressed the affairs of a city into clay. Nothing is lost in this picture. A kind word spoken to no audience is entered. A cruelty committed in an empty room is entered. The watcher does not deliver judgment in the moment. It simply keeps the account, complete and exact, and waits. And because it keeps everything, it also carries everything, which is the detail that makes the single tear so heavy. The being that finally weeps is the same being that has been holding the entire ledger of your life, page after page, without once setting it down. The temple scribes of the ancient world did the same in miniature, keeping the grain and the debts and the names of a city in careful marks. Heaven was that practice raised to its final scale. To feel the full weight of that, you have to set the Ethiopian tradition beside the 2 older civilizations that shaped the world Enoch was written into. Because the idea that your life is being recorded did not begin with Enoch. It was already ancient by the time he was written down. In Egypt, the belief was carved into tomb walls 1,000 years before. When a person died, the Egyptians taught, the heart was carried into a great hall and placed upon a scale. On the other side of the balance sat a single feather, the feather of Ma'at, the measure of truth itself. The god Thoth, the divine scribe, stood beside the scale with a reed pen and a tablet, and he wrote down the result. Every deed a person had done in life was weighed against that feather. And crouched nearby, waiting, was a creature ready to devour the heart that failed the test. The Egyptians did not imagine a forgetful heaven. They imagined a heaven that kept books. In Babylon, the same conviction took a different shape. The Babylonians spoke of the tablets of destiny, heavenly records on which the fate and the deeds of each person were said to be inscribed. Their gods read the sky the way a clerk reads a ledger, and their scribes on earth pressed the movements of the planets into wet clay because they believed those movements were a written message aimed directly at them. To the Babylonian mind, the heavens were not silent. They were a document, and a person's name was somewhere inside it. Both civilizations agreed on the terror at the center of it. To be recorded is to be known, and to be known completely is to have nowhere left to hide. The Egyptian dreaded the weighing of the heart. The Babylonian dreaded the reading of the tablet. Neither of them imagined that the one keeping the record might be on their side. That is the leap the Book of Enoch makes. And it is the reason the Ethiopian tradition could take a machinery of pure dread and turn it into something that grieves for you rather than against you. So when the Book of Enoch describes angels who watch and angels who record, it is not inventing something new. It is standing at the end of a very long line. Egypt weighed the heart, Babylon inscribed the tablet, and Enoch gave that ancient recording heaven a face, and a name, and something the older traditions never dared to give it: feeling. The scribe of Egypt wrote without emotion. The gods of Babylon read without mercy. But the angel of Enoch watches and records, and at one precise moment, breaks. Everything in the surviving text bends toward that moment. The question the whole account is built around is what causes it. What is the single act, out of an entire human life, crowded with failures and cruelties and small quiet betrayals, that the tradition says finally reaches the watcher assigned to you and pulls a tear from a being that has already seen everything a person can do. And here the tradition becomes specific in a way that is almost unbearable. The act the watcher is said to weep over is not murder, and it is not blasphemy, and it is not any of the loud sins that fill the rest of the book. It is quieter than all of that. It is the moment a person hears the voice that has been calling them back for their entire life, recognizes it clearly, and deliberately chooses to silence it. Not a failure to hear, a decision to stop listening. The tradition holds that the watcher can bear your worst deeds, because a deed can still be repented and a record can still be amended. What it cannot bear is the moment you close, on purpose, the door that was left open for you on purpose. That is the single act. That is the one tear. Before we move on to the next passage, stop for a second. What you just heard about the one act that makes your angel weep is the part that changes everything. But it only makes sense when you see it written out next to the original Giez passage. The single tear. The sealed record. It's all in the document linked below. Take 5 seconds right now, grab it, and then come back, because what comes next builds directly on it. The link is in the description. QR code is on your screen. To see why that single act matters so much, you have to follow the Book of Enoch past the crime and into the strangest passage it contains. After the watchers fall, and after the earth cries out, the fallen angels understand what they have done, and they are afraid. So they go to Enoch, the one human who walks with God, and they beg him to do something for them. They ask him to write a petition on their behalf and to carry it up to heaven, because they no longer have the courage to speak for themselves. They ask a mortal man to intercede for angels. Enoch agrees. He writes the petition. He falls asleep and is carried upward in a vision, past the winds and the clouds, into a house of crystal and fire where the great glory sits enthroned. And he delivers the request of the watchers. He asks for their forgiveness. And the answer that comes back is the coldest sentence in the entire book. The petition is refused. The word given to Enoch to carry back down is that there will be no peace for them. Not now, not later, not ever. They have crossed the one line that cannot be uncrossed, and the door that stands open to every other creature is closed to them. Read carefully. That is the engine underneath the weeping angel. The book is fixed on a single terrible possibility. Not that a being can sin, because everything in the book sins, but that a being can reach a point where it no longer wants to return, and that heaven honors that choice even while it grieves over it. The watchers are not finally condemned for what they did on the mountain. They are condemned because when the door was opened, they would not walk back through it, and the angels who carried their petition wept because they had watched the door close from the inside. There is a quiet symmetry in who the book chose to carry this message. Enoch is the one man in the whole of Genesis who does the exact opposite of closing the door. He walks with God, the text says, and then he is not, because God took him. He is the human being who kept saying yes right to the very end, until the boundary between earth and heaven simply opened for him and let him through. The book named after him is built on that contrast. On one side stand the watchers, who had everything and closed the door. On the other stands a single man who had far less and kept it open. And the whole account asks, without ever asking it out loud, which of the two you are going to resemble. Now bring that back to you. The Ethiopian tradition takes this vast cosmic drama and makes it unbearably personal. The same heaven that kept books over Egypt and inscribed tablets over Babylon assigns a single watcher to a single human life. That watcher sees everything. The way the archangels saw the blood on the earth, it records everything. The way Thoth recorded the weight of the heart. And it intercedes, the way Enoch interceded for the watchers, carrying your case upward again and again across the entire length of your life. It can carry a thief. It can carry a liar. It can carry a person who has done things they will never say aloud to anyone. Because all of that can still be turned, and a watcher will carry a petition as many times as there are days in a life. The single tear falls at the one thing that intercession cannot reach. The deliberate, clear-eyed decision to stop being called back at all. The moment the door is not slammed shut by circumstance or torn away by weakness, but is quietly, knowingly closed from the inside by the person standing in front of it. That is the only thing the tradition says the watcher cannot carry upward, because there is nothing left to carry. And so it does the only thing left to a being whose whole purpose was to bring you home. It weeps once, and then it keeps watching anyway. That is the teaching the Ethiopian church preserved, and it is the teaching the rest of the world spent centuries making certain you could not read. The story of how that happened is not about one dramatic band with a single villain in a robe. It is quieter, and in its own way, more damning. For the first few generations of the church, Enoch was simply part of the furniture of belief. Jude quoted it. Tertullian, one of the most influential Latin writers of the early church, argued openly that it should be treated as scripture, and pointed out that the very fact of Jude quoting it gave it real standing. Early Christian communities read it beside the texts that would later harden into the settled Bible. There was no wall between them yet. Then the wall went up. As the church in the Greek and Latin world moved to fix its canon, a list of approved books slowly hardened, and books that stood outside that list were pushed out of the public reading of the churches. Enoch, with its 200 fallen angels and its giants and its unsettling claim that a mortal man had carried a petition into the throne room of heaven, sat badly inside that new order. Influential voices turned against it. Jerome, the scholar who gave the Latin world its standard Bible, set the Book of Enoch aside as apocryphal and unreliable. Augustine, whose thinking shaped Western Christianity more than almost any figure who ever lived, argued that whatever Enoch had truly written could no longer be trusted in the form that now circulated under his name. Once the two men who defined the Western Bible had spoken, the outcome was effectively settled. Enoch was left out and then left to vanish. And it very nearly did. For more than 1,000 years, no complete copy was known anywhere in Europe. The book became a ghost, mentioned in old writings, quoted in that one surviving line of Jude, but unreadable as a whole. Scholars argued about whether it had ever really existed as a single book at all, or whether it was only a famous name attached to a rumor. It took an explorer to break the silence. In 1773, a Scottish traveler named James Bruce came back from years in Ethiopia carrying 3 complete manuscripts of the Book of Enoch in Ge'ez. The church in the highlands had never once stopped copying it. What Europe had thrown away, Ethiopia had quietly kept the entire time. It took decades more for the text to be translated and for the Western world to grasp what had been sitting in those mountain churches all along. When Richard Lawrence produced the first English translation, and later when Robert Charles produced the great annotated edition that most modern readers still lean on, the lost Book of Enoch was finally readable again in the languages of the very world that had discarded it. It is worth sitting for a moment with why Ethiopia, of all places, is the one that kept it. The Ethiopian church accepted Christianity in the 4th century and then developed for centuries in relative isolation from Rome and Constantinople, cut off by distance and by the rise of other powers all around it. That isolation, which from the outside looked like a weakness, turned out to be the reason an entire library survived. Free from the councils and the canon lists that were quietly trimming the Bible everywhere else, the Ethiopian church simply kept the books it had always had, all 81 of them, and asked no one's permission to do it. The widest Bible in the world exists today because one church sat too far away to be told to make it smaller. Then came the confirmation that no one could argue with. In 1947, in the caves above the Dead Sea, shepherds and then archaeologists began pulling out the scrolls that would rewrite the history of the Bible, and among them, in fragment after fragment, was Enoch. Not a medieval invention, not an Ethiopian embellishment. Copies of the Book of Enoch, in Aramaic, older than Christianity itself, matching the text the Highland monks had been faithfully hand-copying for more than 1,000 years. The scale of it is the part that unsettles scholars most. Enoch was not a fringe text clinging to the edges of ancient belief. Among the scrolls recovered from those caves, fragments of Enoch turned up in copy after copy, in numbers that rival some of the books that made the final cut into the Bible. The community that hid those scrolls in the desert clearly treasured it. They read it, they copied it, and they preserved it as carefully as anything else in their library. Whatever caused the later church to back away from Enoch, it was not that the ancient world had ignored the book. The ancient world had loved it. The distance between how much it was once valued and how thoroughly it was later buried is the real mystery, and the single tear sits right in the middle of that gap, which means the line about the weeping angel is not a late legend bolted on at the end. It grows out of the oldest layer of this literature, the same layer confirmed by the scrolls in the desert. Someone in the ancient world looked at the whole machinery of watching heaven, the scales of Egypt, the tablets of Babylon, the recording angels of Enoch, and drew from it a conclusion so sharp that the churches of the West could not sit comfortably beside it. That your life is watched, that it is written down, that the one who watches loves you enough to grieve over you, and that there is exactly one thing you can do that turns that grief into a tear, and it is not the worst thing you will ever do. It is the moment you decide, with full understanding, to stop letting yourself be found. So the question the passage leaves you with is not really about angels at all. It is about the door. Everyone carries one. It is the small, persistent sense, arriving in the quietest moments, that you are being called towards something better than the version of yourself you have settled for. Someone can spend a lifetime leaving that door open a crack, wandering away from it and drifting back, failing and returning, which is exactly the pattern the Watcher is built to carry. The tradition is not frightened of the wandering. It is frightened of the one clear morning when a person decides, calmly and completely, that they would rather not be called anymore, and reaches out and shuts it. Not in rage, not in despair, in preference. That is the act the old scribe could not bear to leave unwritten. It will not feel dramatic in the moment, if it ever comes. There will be no thunder and no voice from the sky. There will only be a small and private turning away, the kind no one standing near you could ever witness, which is precisely why the tradition placed a watcher there to see it. It grieves once for the soul it was sent to bring home, and it could not. The Ethiopian church never treated this as a horror story. It treated it as mercy. Because a heaven that weeps is a heaven that cares whether you come back. The tear is not a threat held over you. It is the measure of how much was hoped for you, right up until the moment you closed the door yourself. And the reason the passage was preserved at all, copied by hand in a language the rest of the world let fall silent, is the same reason the scribe set it down in the first place, so that whoever read it later, whoever you happen to be, would understand that the door is still open for as long as you are still reading. The Watcher is still carrying your petition upward. The one tear has not fallen yet. And in the entire account, from the halls of Egypt, to the tablets of Babylon, to the highlands of Ethiopia, that single thing is the one part of it left entirely in your hands.